Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, November the 7th, 2025. Happy Halloween! Yeah, it is Halloween. Could be today, Friday, might be yesterday or yesterday evening if you're in the Americas. And, that might seem to be a surprise because we regard Halloween as being October the 31st. But you have to remember that this is an astrology channel. And so we're talking about the astrological Halloween, which is the precise moment when the sun hits 15 degrees Scorpio. And I will be looking at the astrological Halloween in some detail at the end of the video. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, November the 7th, 2025. So here is the chart for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So turning to this chart, actually that is the chart of the Halloween chart. I'm not going to be looking at the Halloween chart right now, but I'll be looking at that later. So here's the chart for today, and we have the moon in the middle of Gemini. So I can say the usual stuff about the moon in Gemini. Moon is in an air sign. It is the only traditional planet in an air sign. So when you've got moon in Gemini, the moon can often represent our responses. What is easiest? And perhaps it's our responses when we feel threatened, when we feel that we're under pressure. What do we do? And so when you've got moon in Gemini, you can respond just by talking. I mean, that's the easiest thing to do. Talk yourself out of trouble, change the subject. Do I do that? Well, I don't have my moon in Gemini. My moon is in Aries. So, when you think about the moon, do think about it as your immediate response, as your immediate response. And, really, that moon in Gemini, it's not doing a great deal. Right at the beginning of the day, it was making an opposition to Mercury. So, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, you might be feeling that opposition. But you could say that there is a certain lack of action here. Where are things going? And, that might be the question. And, moon and Gemini can be, a lot of talking, yes. But where are those words going? Yeah, they may not be going anywhere at all. Now, the moon is aspecting the nodal axis. North node is at around 16 Virgo. And so moon is in a mutable sign, making that square. So it could well be that, if we talk too much, if we're saying too much, we're kind of avoiding the issue. Some of us want to avoid the issue, but maybe we're not really able to accept whatever it is that we're supposed to be doing. So that is pretty much it. I mean, there is not a huge amount going on right now if we look at the exact aspects, though you will notice that at noon, November the 7th, Uranus is at 0 degrees 1 Gemini. So it is absolutely on the verge of entering Taurus, going back into Taurus. And if you're in the Americas, then this evening, Uranus does go into Taurus, Friday evening. So, London time, Uranus goes into Taurus. I think it's London time, Uranus goes into Taurus at 2:22 a.m. on Saturday. So that means New York time, that would be 9:22 p.m. this evening, Friday, that Uranus goes into Taurus. And, 3 hours earlier at sort of 6:22 p.m. if you're in, say, California or British Columbia. So that is certainly something that we need to be thinking about. Will we experience it like, right now? Not necessarily. It's more of a larger trend, though, we shouldn't forget that Mars is Mars is making an opposition to Uranus, and so still, I mean, Mars is a couple of degrees away from that opposition, but Mars is, also getting closer and closer to Mercury because, remember, Mercury is slowing down. Mercury is about to go retrograde. This weekend, Mercury goes retrograde, so in a day or two's time, we've got the retrograde Mercury. And I think in my next video, when I look at the weekend, I'll be talking about Mercury's, retrograde motion. And so you might say that we're close to the situation where Mars is on the Mercury-Uranus midpoint. You see, Mercury opposition Uranus. Mars is kind of halfway there, halfway between the conjunction to Mercury and the opposition to Uranus. And so with Mars in that position, it can be quite verbal, particularly now we've got Moon in Gemini as well. So there are certainly a lot of things to say, and we might feel we have to say something, anything, perhaps because we're just feeling nervous, we're feeling hasty, we've got to get our message out, but our words could be clumsy and ill thought out. Maybe not our words, it might be someone else's words. So, think about why you're saying whatever you're saying, and what is your motive? Are you really trying to move things along, or are you just feeling that you just have to do something? So that's the broad picture, and of course it is the astrological Halloween, and the astrological Halloween. Well, it could have been sort of late Thursday. It could be today. Depends on where you are. Certainly, if you're in Europe, Africa, Asia, Australasia, the astrological Halloween will be today, Friday. If you're in the Americas, it will be late on Thursday. So you can see this astrological Halloween here because you've got the Sun at 15 degrees Scorpio. Well, 15 degrees 32 Scorpio, pretty close to true Black Moon Lilith, and maybe that is something we need to talk about. Sun on a true Black Moon Lilith has a real sort of Halloween feel to it, doesn't it? We're aware of things happening in the shadows. Perhaps we're aware of our own shadows or our own shadow projections, and some of us may feel sort of relatively close to the darkness. And we've got true Black Moon Lilith and the Sun making semi-square sesquiquadrate aspect of the Aries point, and that is the key point about 15 degrees Scorpio. It's 15 degrees Scorpio is a powerful degree because it's right in the middle of a fixed sign, and also because it's making this 135 degree aspect to the Aries point, and additionally it's making an 135 degree aspect to Neptune. So there's a real sort of Sun-Neptune feel to today. I mean, we had it yesterday to some extent as well, but so this says something about the times we are living, but things are confusing. And I don't just want to talk about the astrological Halloween. I, if possible, want to talk about some of the sign changes we've recently been experiencing, some of the outer planet sign changes, and maybe how this sort of impacts maybe the US and maybe the political cycle. So in the grand scheme of things, there is a lot going on. But as far as today is concerned, not so many aspects, but enough to be talking about. And just don't forget that the Sun is making a sesquiquadrate to the Aries point, and it's making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune. So that's the picture for the New York. If we switch to Sydney, Australia, here is the chart for Sydney, Australia. The Moon is earlier in the sign. So the Moon is at 6 degrees Gemini. So I talked about Moon opposition Mercury, saying it's a bit distant maybe if you're in the Americas. But if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon is exactly opposition Mercury at noon, approximately, and so moon opposition Mercury, that is about words, how we speak. Moon in Gemini, as I've just discussed, is our immediate response, and our immediate response might be just to say something, anything. And if moon is opposition Mercury, the words can come tumbling out, but have we necessarily thought them through? And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. I'm not sure that there's a huge amount to report here. The Earth is still making that sextile to Jupiter. It's not as exact as it used to be, but Earth sextile Jupiter, I would regard as a fairly positive influence, and it allows us, if we try hard enough to see the positive, to find that positive, because things aren't quite as bad as they seem, and the universe is certainly telling us the way forward, and we just have to be aware of that, and we have to not necessarily be confined to any one particular course of action. There are always other possibilities, and we just perhaps need to open our eyes. They are available. So that's it with the heliocentric view, and now I want to switch to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, November the 7th, 2025. Aries, you are perhaps feeling a need to do something. That's what you want to do. You feel that you should be doing something. I mean, there is a lot of restless energy going on around you, and you feel that you need to participate. And if nothing is going on, you perhaps want to initiate. And I think that is something that you are able to do. But you have to accept that if you're not careful, there just could be a lot of talking, a great deal of talking. And the question is, where does the talking go to? And as an Aries, you can find words incredibly irritating. Words can just go on, and they can just get nowhere. And as far as you're concerned, it is all about action. And I think that you can create action, but you're going to have to put in quite a lot of effort. And part of it is because of the moon. I mean, the moon is not really doing anything. The moon will eventually make some aspects. It will eventually make a square to Saturn, but square to Saturn, that's perhaps not a great deal to look forward to. And so instead you've got to see things perhaps from a different perspective, and that's perhaps what it's all about. Don't forget, Mars, your ruler, is now in Sagittarius. There were excuses, very real excuses for a lack of action while Mars was in Scorpio. You had things to think about. Your feelings were quite powerful, and now that Mars has made that transition into Sagittarius, well, you need to have vision, real vision. It's not just about what you want to do right now. Your desire to take immediate action. It's more about thinking about the wider perspective, and what is right and what is wrong, and that's part of Mars being in Sagittarius. Mars is in a sign that is ruled by Jupiter, and so when you think about Jupiter, one way of looking at Jupiter is the moral and ethical side of it. Thinking about what is the right thing to do, and what is what is immoral, what is unacceptable, and your own morality might be coming into focus, and certain things, as certain things, as far as you're concerned, may indeed be wrong, completely wrong, and you might therefore have to take a stand. I mean, I'm not saying you have to take a stand right now. I mean, Mars does move into Sagittarius, and it moves into Sagittarius. Well, it's already in Sagittarius, but it stays in Sagittarius until the 15th of December. And so it is a time when, you have a strong sense of right and wrong, and maybe you want to say something about it. I mean, it's very personal, this sense of right and wrong. Just because you believe something is right, or wrong, doesn't mean that that really is the case. But it's always personal, isn't it? And there could be a point, Aries, where you feel you have to come to some kind of judgment, a judgment of your fellow human beings, judgment of what they're actually doing, and so that may or may not be a good thing. And so perhaps you should be thinking about getting your own house in order, making sure that everything is as good as it can be before thinking about what other people are doing. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, we can see the problems. I mean, already. I mean, for example, you might say things which you might later regret, and there is going to be something about you that is a bit nervous and might be ever so slightly difficult to deal with. Especially as Mercury is moving towards a conjunction of Mars. You've certainly got a lot to say. There's a lot to be critical about. But on the other hand, if you make the effort, you're going to be quite good at seeing the best in people. Again, you've got to make the effort, but you can see the best in people, and you can encourage them to make the most of what they have. And Aries, you are always a good person to have around. Aries is an exciting sign, and when things feel boring, when things feel flat, it's always good when an Aries walks into the room, and you can really lift everyone's spirit, and so think beyond your own sense of right and wrong, and think about what other people can do and how other people can be encouraged. Taurus, you may find today that you're not sure what to do or how to go about it, and there is some danger that you kind of lose your way. For example, you might just get attracted to something which it seems very appealing. You want to give it everything you've got, but the question is it really the right thing to do? And there is a danger that you take a detour. It seems a harmless detour, but once you start pursuing that detour, things could start to go wrong. And maybe it was just a case of you being attracted to something. It seemed attractive, it seemed interesting, and you wanted to take it further, but it was, in the end, a waste of energy. And perhaps that's what you have to remember, that today you have, I think, a limited amount of energy. You can't do everything at once. And, if you try to do everything at once, things might go wrong. And instead you should just pause and work out what is important, and also recognize that there has been a big change. Venus, your ruler, has gone into Scorpio, and when we were looking at Venus in Scorpio yesterday, I mentioned that you can connect Venus in Scorpio with debauchery. Now, the connection between Venus and Scorpio and debauchery is the Crowley Tarot card. I mean, I don't really like to mix astrology and the tarot cards. I mean, tarot cards are not really my thing. I mean, I have in the past spent a lot of time playing with tarot cards, but it's not something that I'm really heavily involved in. But if you look at the Crowley Tarot pack, you'll see that with the Seven of Cups is debauchery, and it's also associated with Venus in Scorpio. So there is some possibility, as you get used to Venus in Scorpio, that you just might do something that is against your own better judgment. I'm not saying it's going to be debauched, but it could be lazy, it could be careless, and you might try to enjoy yourself, but in a way that is wrong. I mean, most sensible Taurans are not going to fall for that trap, but I think that it's at least something you need to be aware of. And also, now that you've got Venus in Scorpio, you've got this additional confusion that you have to deal with other people. You're aware of other people. And, today, in fact, Venus and the Sun are exactly 15 degrees apart. And, 15 degrees apart, you might think that is completely obscure. Well, 15 degrees is a semi-sextile. So a sextile is 60 degrees, a semi-sextile is 30 degrees. A 15-degree aspect is, you could say it's a semi-sextile. And with this Venus being exactly 15 degrees to the Sun, you think it's going to act like a conjunction, but it's not like a conjunction. It's more like something, or maybe someone you have to deal with, which is just uncomfortable. It doesn't feel right. And that might be sort of undermining you a bit, and perhaps you're having to deal with just a confusing situation. It may not be a confusing situation of your making, but it could still be an issue. And while you're at it, Taurus, don't forget about money. The moon is in Gemini. Moon is not doing a huge amount in Gemini, but while it's in Gemini, you may be thinking about money. You may not want to think about money, but the financial issue is just weighing in on you. Now we've had this sign change, and so it's important not to think too much. I mean, you have to think about things clearly, but the trouble about Moon and Gemini is it can just think and think and think, and thinking can turn into worrying, and it just might not get anywhere. And there's a possibility that an over concern about money could trip you up, and that is because the Moon in Gemini is making a square to the nodal axis. The North Node is at 16 degrees Pisces, and it just might be that if you're too concerned about money, then that might damage other areas of your life. For example, it might undermine a friendship. It shouldn't undermine a friendship, but you're going to be very quick to see financial linkages. And perhaps you're going to be too quick to see those linkages, and you might sort of jump to a conclusion which is not necessarily valid or true. And this whole thing sort of underlines the point that today, Taurus, there's just some danger that you just move in the wrong direction, whatever that direction is. You might be distracted. You might see something that seems to be appealing, and you go towards it, and it's just an illusion. So be logical, and if in doubt, then probably the answer is don't do it. Gemini. Just a reminder, Gemini, that Uranus is about to leave your sign. it leaves your sign. Well, if you're in the Americas, this evening, Uranus leaves Gemini and moves back into Taurus. If you're not in the Americas, well, it will be sometime today. Sometime on Saturday that the sign change will happen. And it's quite a high level thing. I'm not saying that you're going to be immediately aware of it, but you have to think that something is changing, and the question is, what is it? Well, Uranus moving into Gemini, moving back into Taurus, could be about going back into the past, what you thought was the past. You thought you got over things, while Uranus was in, while Uranus was in Gemini. There seemed to be, the brand new future that you were starting to welcome, and now, as Uranus moves into Gemini, moves out of Gemini, there are just things you might have to go back over. You don't want to go back over them. That's absolutely not what you wanted to do. Gemini is a future-orientated sign, but right now, I think that you've perhaps gone too far. You've gone as far as you can, and you need to go over old ground. And it could be a process of understanding. When Uranus moves back into Taurus, maybe you've done some emotional exploration. You've looked into yourself and the sort of the depths of your own psychology, and you came to some conclusions, some quite disturbing conclusions, some quite interesting conclusions as well. But now Uranus moving into Gemini, you thought you were over that, but that might not be the case. And so Gemini, I'm not talking about anything necessarily very short. I'm not talking about anything necessarily very short term, but between now and the end of April of next year, Uranus will be will be in Taurus, and that's something you have to think about. And also Uranus in Gemini, it might emphasize technology. Technology could be important. So I'm a Gemini, and you can probably hear my computer. My computer's just gone berserk. It's just making a huge amount of noise. This is telling me, as I talk about Uranus in Gemini, that I need to replace my computer, like, right now. And so it's kind of maybe an example of astrology in action. And I don't want to project, but maybe it really is time to think about technology. I certainly need to think about technology completely urgently. Like, as soon as I've made this video, I need to do things urgently. So yes, so perhaps you need to think about your own relationship with technology, because it's not just about Uranus moving back into Taurus. It may be that moment when Uranus is exactly at 0 degrees Gemini, that you have to think about your relationship to the future and your relationship to things of the future. And of course, what is of the future? And of course, that is technology. And we have also, Moon is in Gemini. Moon is in the same sign as Uranus, so it's particularly clear, at the moment, what absolutely needs to be done. I think what needs to be done. Certainly, as far as technology is concerned, but it may just be other things that you have to go back over. But aside from that, Gemini, I don't think that it need be an especially difficult day. I think that your ability to get on with people is pretty good at the moment. Mercury, your ruler, is in Sagittarius. It's your opposite sign, and so it's a very sociable place for Mercury. And at the same time, there can be a fair amount of sharing. I mean, Mercury in Sagittarius is about sharing to a great extent. You don't have to do everything yourself. You don't have to completely rely on other people. You can let other people take the strain to a point, but but as far as relying on other people, they are important, other people, but you have to work out how important they need be. And of course, with while Mercury is in Sagittarius, you don't want to exaggerate. On the other hand, if you do make the effort, I think that you can be pleasantly surprised, and perhaps there is something connected here with ability. Where your abilities lie, where other people's abilities lie, and you can maybe share your talents with others, and that can be a real feature of today, and maybe find your own abilities being recognized in the same way that you can recognize other people. So I think that there is good work to be done in a social setting, but you just have to make sure that you don't take things too far. Mercury is making a conjunction to Mars, and this conjunction to Mars is just going to get closer and closer over the next few days. And Mercury-Mars conjunction can indicate a point of irritation. But so maybe you can put yourself in a position where you can make the most of other people, but not take things too far. And perhaps in terms of every relationship, there just comes a point where you have to work out where to stop when you've got your maximum utility from that relationship. And once you've hit that point, then it might be time to create a bit of distance. Cancer. There really is not a huge amount going on at the moment. It's pretty quiet. The moon is in Gemini. It's not making a huge number of aspects. Okay, moon is kind of opposition Mercury. Okay, that opposition between moon and Mercury might be strong if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but if you're in the Americas, for example, it just may feel that not a huge amount is happening, but there is a certain lack of application. And when you've got this lack of application, things just not connecting, you might have ideas about what initiatives you'd like to do, but being able to see them through. I won't even say hard work, because hard work does suggest that you are at least engaged with something, and it just maybe there is just nothing to be engaged with. And maybe that's a good thing. It means Cancer, but I don't think that there's necessarily any real pressure. And perhaps Cancer, you may feel that you just want to take a rain check. It's nothing, and nothing. Yeah, there's nothing that you absolutely must do, and that's possibly all there is to say. Now, we do know that Venus is in Scorpio. Venus has just moved into Scorpio, and I talked about Venus moving into Scorpio yesterday, and I took the view that Venus moving into Scorpio, by and large, for you, is a good thing. Venus in the Cancerian chart may arguably work quite well in Scorpio, even though Venus in Scorpio is in its detriment. But it's because you understand what's happening, and if, for example, the mood is not great, people may be brooding, they may not be able to fully express themselves, at least not express themselves as well as they used to be. You understand, and you can pick up on things that maybe other people can't. With Moon in Gemini, there could be a lot of talking about pretty much nothing. And being a Cancerian, that words conceal things. words are like an empty front. They seem to, they don't mean anything in themselves. But if you look at the pattern of words, how people are talking, when they're being silent, it tells you a great deal. And so it could be cancer that the best way of handling today is just to watch and to listen. Yeah, I think that you might be tempted to be open about your ideas and your feelings. I mean, after all, the moon is your ruler and it is in Gemini. So moon in Gemini might just want to say something, but I don't think you necessarily have to say, anything at all. And it could be that if you were to get involved in the overall conversation, you would start to lose your cutting edge. You're trying to understand what is happening, where things are moving, and if you're a participant, then you lose your objectivity. So perhaps Cancer, the key to today is participating as little as possible. Maybe let other people take the great initiatives, or at least try to take great initiatives. I don't think that anyone is going to be, especially successful. And, with Venus moving into Scorpio, I mentioned that this does perhaps increase your sensitivity, but also it's perhaps about what you enjoy and how far you take enjoyment. And it is good to enjoy yourself. It is good to have fun. You can have fun with Venus moving into Scorpio. Venus is, in some respects, the planet of fun, but it also can be the planet of, indulgence. I mean, one can take it further and link Venus in Scorpio with debauchery. If you follow Aleister Crowley and his tarot pack, so in the Crowley tarot pack, Venus in Scorpio is linked with debauchery, and it's in Scorpio. It's kind of in your fifth house, and the fifth house is often connected with pleasure, and so Cancer, do think about what you enjoy and how far you want to enjoy yourself, and whether indeed you might be taking it too far, and not really thinking about the future. I mean, it's okay. It's good to enjoy yourself in the moment, but you do have to account for the future, and it might feel at times that you're very alive, and that's part of what all of us are trying to do. We're trying to feel alive, but one has to ask: is that feeling of being alive the real thing, or is it just a substitute? And so maybe that's something that you might want to consider, while Venus is moving moving through Scorpio. But I wouldn't worry about today too much, and don't feel obliged. Things are changing. Tomorrow the moon will move into Cancer, so you'll have, over the weekend, you'll have a moon in your sign, and that's going to probably make things more easy for you. I think you'll have a greater sense of confidence as well as autonomy, just being able to do your own thing in your own way, but also perhaps being able to be more social and to be more involved. Leo. Sun still in Scorpio, but the Sun is now right in the middle of Scorpio, and being a Leo, that could be relevant. I mean, after all, the Sun is your ruler, and so with the Sun in Scorpio, right in the middle of Scorpio, well, you might feel centered. You might be of a view that this is it. You're right in the middle of your own world, and you don't have to move. So that could be a way of looking at Sun in Scorpio, having a Friday where you decide you're not going to do anything. And this has been brewing. And now that the Sun is making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune, okay, it was kind of making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune yesterday, but it's still there, the Sun sesquiquadrate Neptune. You just might be of the view that this is the safest choice, that you don't want to take risks. You can see that the outside world is fundamentally unstable, and so why take that risk when you're quite happy where you are. But the sun is conjunct true black moon Lilith, and if you stay in one place for too long, then that means that your unconscious starts coming into action, and you start thinking things, you start feeling things start to appear, and you maybe become conscious not just of who you are, but who you could be, and you're aware of maybe of the dark side as well. And that's perhaps the problem of staying in one place for too long. If you stay in one place for too long, things start to cook, things start to emerge that you hadn't necessarily planned on. And maybe, Leo, in the end, you do need some variety, because if you just give yourself no variety, when you stare at something for too long, things can happen. And the moon is in Gemini, and the moon's not doing much in Gemini. And the moon in Gemini can, as far as you're concerned, Leo, just be about enjoying yourself in company of other people. Other people can provide a distraction, and I think maybe you need a distraction. It's not that it's not that things are necessarily going anywhere. It's just if you're always thinking about yourself and your own needs and your own perhaps importance, then it can be a problem, and you may not actually make much progress. Additionally, when you are with other people, something might happen as far as your own fundamental optimism is concerned. There is something at the moment which is a bit of a dead weight, and it doesn't seem as if you're optimistic about very much. But I think when you're in company, something does change. You can be more positive, and you can talk about things in a relaxed, easygoing way, and in the end, you can start to see things in the best possible light. And even if you can't, just using positive words can have an impact on other people. They pick up on your positivity in the same way that you can pick up on their positivity. So if you come into today with a negative state of mind, I'm not saying that is going to happen, but if you do come into the day with such a state of mind, don't feel that it always has to be like that. I mean, I think that positivity might seem a bit forced, a bit contrived. It's always really obnoxious when people try to be positive for no reason at all, always look on the bright side of life and so on. But today it might work. Just thinking about how something could work, trying something out that appears to have no chance of being successful, but then you never know. So give other people a chance, and also give yourself a chance. Virgo, Uranus is absolutely on the verge of changing signs, moving out of Gemini and into Taurus. This sign change, if you're in the Americas, happens this evening. If you're not in the Americas, it will happen tomorrow. I don't know if the sign change itself, is especially relevant, because Uranus is a slow-moving collective planet, and maybe the precise moment of the sign change doesn't matter. But as far as you're concerned, Virgo, it could be a step back. You might have felt, Virgo, that you were sort of moving in a particular direction, It seemed perhaps, exciting and, future orientated. That's Uranus in Gemini. And it might also relate it to your ambitions and you wanting to do something with your life that was exciting, which embraced the future. And now that Uranus is moving back into Taurus, it could be a time to reflect, perhaps to be more orientated towards the past. And Uranus will be in Taurus until the end of April. So you've got nearly 6 months of Uranus being in Taurus. So perhaps this is a time, Virgo, when you can sort of reflect on your beliefs and what you believe to be true, and maybe your underlying philosophy. And it just could be that some of your ideas, you need to just go over it again, just one more time to just make sure you've really sorted it out. But as far as today, Friday, is concerned, this is the last weekday that Uranus will be in Taurus until the end of April. Sorry, that Uranus will be in Gemini until the end of April, and also the Moon is also in Gemini. And so maybe today, Friday, you want to make sort of one final push, to discover what is available. And so if you see something that attracts your curiosity, then perhaps you really should go for it and see what can be achieved, because I think that potentially quite a lot can be achieved. But don't expect anything sort of massive. Don't expect anything huge, massive, and unexpected to happen. But I think maybe just today you can be aware of the options and the possibilities, and perhaps you should write it down. And think about think about today in terms of the next 6 months. And if there's something you've been meaning to do and you weren't sure whether you were going to do it today or do it on Monday, well, maybe you should do it today, particularly from the viewpoint of your career or your job, whatever is important to you, as far as your ambitions are concerned. I mean, it could require a bit of extra effort. You might have to sort of push people a bit. A lot of people are going to be quite unresponsive today. They just won't feel that they'll feel that they just don't have enough energy, that they can't necessarily see things through to a completion. So that they do have to be pushed. But I think you can do it, and you might in the process make people sort of irritated. But if you are feeling pushy, and I think some Virgos could be, do try to sort of understand other people's way of doing things. So you don't want to be too impatient, but on the other hand, you don't want to take no for an answer. If something does need to be done today, Virgo, then you make sure that it really does happen. Libra. Venus is in Scorpio. I mean, Venus is in Scorpio, and Venus moving into Scorpio is a big change for you, and it's something that just might take a bit of getting used to. I mean, although Venus is not going to be in Scorpio forever, by the end of the month, it'll be or very beginning of December, Venus will be in Sagittarius. But while Venus is in Scorpio, there is just certain things that you may have to deal with that you just don't really want to deal with, and you may be thinking, for example, about boring issues, like money. And money is, of course, a token for something else very often. It's not just about what you have in the bank or the cash in your pocket. It's about power and who has the power, and sometimes people use money as a way of controlling. And today that might occur to you, especially as Venus is making a semi-sextile to the sun. So Venus is exactly 15 degrees away from the sun, and that does make you nervous. It makes you feel that there is just you know, something that is maybe bearing down on you, that is inhibiting you. And it's also a reminder that Venus is starting to move towards a conjunction of the sun. Venus is not quite combust, but over the course of the month, Venus does get closer and closer to the sun, and it doesn't actually make the conjunction with the sun. So it's not something that you need to be immediately worried about. But with Venus moving closer to the sun, it might feel that something is just preventing you from fully expressing yourself. I mean, it could be something to do with money. It could be someone playing games with money. It just could be also your own concerns about money, or it just might be. It could be another person. It could be someone who should know better. And so if you are worried about something as Venus moves closer to the sun, you should remind yourself that Venus doesn't actually make the conjunction to the sun while Venus is in Scorpio. So Venus conjunct the sun. If Venus was to be conjunct the sun in Scorpio, that would be putting a lot of pressure on Venus. And so that that pressure, it is there, but I don't think that the pressure will become too intense. And so as far as money is concerned, don't necessarily take it too seriously. And as far as today is concerned, perhaps you should just be aware that the moon is in Gemini. The moon is in Gemini. Moon is not doing very much in Gemini, but it's in an air sign. And because it's in an air sign, you do have room to breathe. And the question is, Libra, how do you find that room to breathe? And one way of finding that room is to perhaps do something just ever so slightly different. If you just continue with your normal routine, doing things in the same old way, then you might feel the pressure. But if you make a decision to do something, it doesn't have to be that unusual, but something that breaks your routine, that maybe just gives you exposure to something new, perhaps enlightening, then things will be better. And also, and perhaps most importantly, you'll get some perspective, and perspective, is what is needed. Understanding where things really should be going, and also, how seriously should you be taking things. There may be things that you're inclined to take very seriously, but if you can get that perspective, if you can get a bit of distance, you'll see that it's all quite trivial. And finally, Libra, I would advise you not to feel that anything has to happen. And while I think it's important that you do find some distance, you do something slightly different that does break your routine, you don't want to be in a position where you're tempted to do something that you have your doubts about. And that could happen. This is particularly the case if you feel that you're being directly pressured. And you might feel that it's the best choice to give in to pressure. You might be attracted to things which maybe look exciting and look glamorous, but I think that could be a trap. And if you're honest with yourself and you can just get the larger picture and put your own life in perspective, and what's going on in perspective, I don't think that you will fall foul of temptation. Scorpio. there is obviously stuff going on in Scorpio. Venus is now in Scorpio, and Venus is making an interesting aspect to the Sun. The Sun is 15 degrees. The Sun is 15 degrees from Venus in Scorpio. And, the 15 degrees might sound, quite an obscure aspect, but it is exact. And 15 degrees is half a semisextile, and a semisextile is, a half a sextile. So it's part of a series of aspects which in astrology can be important. And this aspect is about how you proceed. And with the Sun in Scorpio, with the Sun right in the middle of Scorpio, you could say that you are quite strongly placed. It's a part of Scorpio which you might say is strong and resilient and quite unbending. The Sun right in the middle of a fixed sign. But Scorpio, you can sometimes just not see things because you maybe don't want to see them. On an unconscious level, you're probably aware of them, but you just don't want to. You don't want to look. You don't want to know about it. And there's a danger, perhaps, Scorpio, illustrated by this Sun semisextile Venus, is that you could be so focused on yourself and what's important to you that you forget other details. And one important detail might be other people. I've mentioned already that Venus has moved into your sign. I talked about that yesterday. And you can see Venus moving into Scorpio as representing another person trying to get in touch with you, or it just could be someone in your immediate environment who is just there, but maybe you're not giving them as much attention as they feel they need. And so perhaps this Sun semisextile Venus, the challenge here is to pay attention to someone, or even to incorporate someone. You might feel that someone is irrelevant, isn't necessary. You maybe don't want to think about how they're feeling and what their motivations are, but you should make the effort. Why would you want to make the effort? Well, there are two possible reasons. There are going to be more reasons of that. One reason might be just sheer compassion. Maybe someone needs your help, and it might not take very much to make that person happier or to deal with some problem they have. Alternatively, and this is a possibility, we may be talking about some kind of opportunity, maybe represented by another person, which for one reason or another, you could be ignoring. And so you have to, Scorpio, be aware of the options. It may not be easy because you've got other things to focus on, but you don't want to be too single-minded, and that's probably what today is all about. I think that today should be fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with today. And if you make a special effort to get on with people and to see what they've got to offer, I think that things could work out extremely well. Indeed, you might say that to some extent that is part of what you're supposed to be doing. And you mustn't think that by involving other people, you're going to be losing anything. And you might think that if you get too close to someone, you'll be sacrificing something very important to Scorpio. There's always something very important to Scorpio. You're that kind of sign, but it just needn't be quite like that. And it just could be that some people are there to help you, and they're there to actually enrich your life if you give them a chance. Sagittarius. We still have Mercury and Mars in Sagittarius. Well, it's just the beginning. I mean, Mercury and Mars, well, certainly Mars is going to be in Sagittarius until December the 15th. Mercury is about to go retrograde. And, with Mercury going retrograde, that is a reminder that Mercury is not going to be in Sagittarius forever. It's actually going to go back into Scorpio. And so with Mercury about to go retrograde, you might notice that some people, or maybe just one person, is becoming a little indecisive. You thought that someone or a group of people were very sure of themselves. You knew what they were doing. You knew where they were going. They probably thought so as well, but we might be dealing with a change of mind. And so if you are reliant on another person, not just today, but, over the next few weeks, and your plans are completely hinging on another person, then think again. It may be that someone is about to change their mind. And if they change their mind, that might be a great disappointment. So as far as possible, you should maybe be thinking about how you can do things, on your own. You shouldn't be, necessarily reliant on other people. If you can do it on your own without their assistance, so much the better. And additionally, one thing that might be happening this evening, if you're in the Americas, or tomorrow, Saturday, if you're elsewhere, is that Uranus is leaving Gemini, and Uranus will leave Gemini and go into Taurus. It won't come back into Gemini until the end of April, and that might be something that you might think about preparing for. And you might say that Uranus moving out of Gemini means that the pressure could be off as far as certain relationships are concerned. While Uranus is in Gemini, it suggests a time when things are not always stable as far as relationships are concerned, or alternatively, you need change. But you're not consciously aware of that change and that need for change. And so when you see other people behaving in an unusual way or an unexpected way, the whole point is to remind you of your own need to change path, your own need to shake things up, and not to be caught in in some routine that maybe has outlived its usefulness. But there's still stuff to work out. How change is brought about, and how routines have become rather stagnant, and that might be something you'll be thinking about once Uranus moves into Taurus, and Uranus will be in Taurus until the end of April of next year. But as far as today is concerned, the moon is in Gemini. It's kind of making opposition aspects to Mars and Mercury. So whatever's going on, I do think that the social interpersonal dimension could be quite important at the moment. And so be aware of what other people are doing and what other people are saying, and try to be tolerant. The moon is in Gemini, so with the moon in Gemini, people may be talking a lot, and people may be talking a lot of nonsense. And you perhaps should be thinking not about the content of people's words, particularly if those people are important to you, but not to be thinking about the content, but instead to be thinking about why. Why are they saying what they're saying? What are they trying to achieve with their words? And you might then realize that, but it's not the words that matter. It's the fact that words are used as like a smokescreen, and you have to understand, what's underlying that, and that's perhaps something for you to work out, over the course of the day. Capricorn. I'm not saying that today is going to be especially dramatic, and really that is my message for everyone. I think that today doesn't see much astrological activity, and okay, we know that Uranus is about to change sign, but the moon is not doing much. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it makes an opposition to Mercury, and so you might find, particularly at the beginning of the day, but certain people talk too much. I mean, people do talk too much. I was just telling Sagittarius that people talk too much, and I can say the same for you, that you might just be irritated by what people say and by the vacuousness of what is being said, because the words you're hearing are probably going to be, pretty meaningless, and therefore should not be taken too seriously. And I think that is an important point. People might say things which sound dramatic, but I don't think that they necessarily are. And so just don't allow yourself to be distracted. Don't allow yourself to respond too much to what people say and what people do. And that might matter because at the moment, Capricorn, you're quite capable of being harsh. You can say things which might be extreme, which can cut people down to size. And is that really what you want? And language can be a weapon, Capricorn, and you can use language to cause a huge amount of damage. You can break things up with language, and so other people's words might be meaningless, but your own words can be very meaningful, and they can be cutting and they can be destructive. And I therefore would suggest that you try to think about the situation and think about what fundamentally you are trying to achieve, and wherever you go, Capricorn, you can see that things aren't 100% right. Once you get beyond the words, you see that things aren't perfect. Again, it's not your problem. You might try to socialize today. I mean, some Capricorns might. I'm not quite sure how well it would work. I mean, the sun at the moment is making a conjunction to true Black Moon Lilith, and true Black Moon Lilith, can be quite a negative force. And this might say something, for example, about other people and what other people are presenting. And so if you spend too much time with other people, you might in the end recoil. So all of this suggests, Capricorn, that you should maybe just not feel that you have to be anywhere. And if you just do things in your own way, and perhaps you can do some sort of low-scale organization, just making sure that everything is in the right place, that might be the right thing to do. Although the moon is making a square to the nodal axis, and with the moon making a square to the nodal axis, it could be, Capricorn, that there are several ways to organize things. There's several ways, for example, to set up routines, and not all of those ways are right for you. So just because something seems straightforward, you've got a problem, it needs to be sorted out. You do the first thing that comes to mind. You think you're rationalizing the situation. Your first attempt to rationalize the situation may not be the right approach. It just could be that you've missed something out. And so if you are trying to organize yourself or trying to organize other people, don't think that it's going to be easy. Don't think that you can just apply, sheer logic. You have to maybe, use your feelings and your intellect, but maybe the feelings and intellect can come together for you to be able to create the right solution. But probably the first solution is not going to be the best solution. Aquarius. The sun is interesting at the moment. I mean, I'll be talking about the sun, later in this video, because it is it's Halloween today, or could be late on Thursday. I mean, astrological Halloween, which is different from the Celtic Halloween. I'm not saying that the Celtic Halloween should be devalued in any way, but this is an astrological channel, and so the sun being at 15 degrees Scorpio, that is important. And Scorpio is an important sign for Aquarians, as I've been saying for quite a long time. And so at this moment of power, you may start to understand what it's all about. And I'm thinking about your ambitions, and I've been talking about your ambitions a great deal. And even though Mars has left Scorpio, your ambitions still matter. And right now, you're able to connect what you want to do with the whole way in which the world is unfolding and is developing. So it's not just about you. It's about the Earth. It's about the planet. It's about the human experience. And maybe this is a time when you can align yourself with that human experience. Because if you want to be genuinely successful and genuinely satisfied with what you're doing, then you have to take into account the human tides, the tides of history, and you want to be able to align yourself with all of that. And I think that is something you can do with this sun exactly on 15 degrees Scorpio, and the sun is conjunct true black moon Lilith, and sun conjunct true black moon Lilith sounds a bit scary, but if you're aware of other people's fears, the fears that are all around us. We all have our demons. Humanity has its demons, things that we're all running away from. And if you're aware of it, somehow there's a chance to be able to harness it, for your own purposes. Now, I don't want to make things too heavy. I mean, I think that today, aside from all of that, you can enjoy yourself and you can be creative. You shouldn't expect wonders, but with the moon in Gemini, moon in an air sign, I think that you're able to have fun. And maybe you should also be thinking about Uranus in Gemini. Uranus has been in Gemini since the beginning of July, and Uranus is about to leave Gemini and go back into Taurus. I mean, I'll be talking about Uranus going back into Taurus maybe in tomorrow's video for the weekend, but perhaps we should be thinking about what Uranus in Gemini was about. And Uranus in Gemini was a period of great individualism, or at least you were aware since the beginning of July of how much of an individual you really were, and what you needed to do to realize that individuality, be a super creative Aquarian, and that's what being an Aquarius is all about. And it's not as easy as it sounds. You have to consider, for example, social pressure. Other people have other ideas about what you should be doing, and sometimes it's difficult to resist that pressure. But you saw the path, hopefully, since the beginning of July, and now that the moon is about to move into Taurus, it's possible that some of that creative spark will go into hibernation, or at least will have to be reconsidered. Because Taurus is an important sign from an Aquarian view, and so while Uranus is in Taurus, you might have to kind of go back to the drawing board. At least that might be how it feels, and to come to some new ideas about what you are all about, because that is what creativity is about. Firstly, you have to work out who you are, where you have come from, and then you put it into practice. And so maybe there is some more working out to be done, between now and the end of April, while Uranus is moving through Taurus. Pisces. This position at the moment, astrologically, it's not that busy in some respects. There aren't many exact aspects today. Right at the beginning of the day, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it would be more towards lunchtime. The moon is making an opposition to Mercury, but the moon opposition Mercury is a fairly sort of short-lived aspect, and if you do feel moon opposition Mercury, it could be about your own ideas or other people's ideas. Maybe some people are being annoying or challenging. Maybe challenging. You at some level would perhaps like to do very little. You have your own way of doing things, your own way of working, and then other people have their input, and as far as you're concerned, that input may not be particularly welcome. And so you may not want people to suggest things to you, to be told what to do. You might be sort of uncharacteristically stubborn. Again, especially at the beginning of the day, especially if you're in Australia or New Zealand. I think this isn't so much of an issue if you're in the Americas. So once you've decided how to respond, you can largely do what you like. It's that kind of day. I just don't think that there is a massive amount of pressure. If you want to make things happen, I think you certainly can make things happen. I think that if you make a real effort to be sociable, I don't think you really want to be sociable, not really. But if you make an effort, I think that you'll cover a lot of ground, and you can maybe create unity out of nothing. That's something you can do, again, if you make the effort, but you might just feel that it's just not worth it, and instead, maybe you just want to drift into the fact that today is the astrological Halloween. It could be last night if you're in the Americas, but the astrological Halloween is something I will be talking about very soon, because I'm kind of approaching the end of the video. But as far as how it affects you, the sun is right in the middle of Scorpio, right in the center of things. And this may say something about your beliefs, what is important to you. And beliefs take many forms, and maybe you believe in some things which aren't necessarily always very pleasant, and that is shown by the fact that the sun is a conjunct true black moon Lilith. And so with the sun conjunct true black moon Lilith, some of your ideas could be disturbing. Where your mind goes, where your imagination goes, but you maybe have to go through these disturbing ideas. Things that are disturbing might be just very real, and we have to go below the surface. And if something is hidden, it very often seems to be evil. It's only when it is revealed, when the light is shone on it, that we start to see it in a different way. And also, the sun is making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune. So, and the sun is additionally is 135 degrees from the Aries point. Neptune is still very close to the Aries point. So there may be things that you start to realize of a sort of an emotional nature, and perhaps also of a spiritual nature, as I've just said, and even a religious nature as well. And so maybe that's where you would like your focus to be. And if you can explore things which sometimes you don't give yourself time to, maybe you're worrying about the fast pace of a material world. It's all you don't have time for yourself. You don't have time to think about your overall purpose. But now I think that you can start to think about it. You do have a chance, and hopefully you will make the most of this opportunity. And just, Pisces, just don't feel obliged. I mean, no one should feel obliged today, whatever their sign. And so it's up to you what you make of today, and that might mean that you actually have a considerable amount of freedom. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now it's time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I ask the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 38, which is opposition. Now, this hexagram is not necessarily as bad as it sounds. Opposition indicates that we don't necessarily get on with everyone. We're very aware of the differences between ourselves and other people. And that is the nature of life. We can't be on the same wavelength with everyone, and it might be that at the moment perhaps we're aware of people we've fallen out with. We may be thinking that certain relationships are coming to an end, that there is no common ground, and so that's our initial view of the matter. Now, with this hexagram, we do have some moving lines, and the first line moves, the second line moves, and the top line moves, and a lot of these moving lines are about repair. They're not about the intensification of an opposition. They're about how we can get back in touch with people, and the events that take place that allow us to get over this opposition. And for example, we should make some effort to be out and about. There might be meetings that we weren't expecting. So just because we've fallen out with someone, doesn't mean to say that that's the end of it. And maybe we need to encounter someone in a different circumstance. So if you have fallen out with someone, or you feel that you and another person just simply aren't on the same wavelength, ask yourself, what was the environment in which the falling out took place, or the environment in which you decided that this person is no good for you? And it could be the environment's fault rather than the person's fault. And if you can encounter someone or talk to someone in a different environment, then you might see a completely different side to their personality, or indeed they might see a different side to your personality. And you might then realize that there's all been a bit of a misunderstanding. And the last line is about a misunderstanding. The last line talks about seeing people in the worst possible light. You see them as being horrific and ugly and covered in mud, and you're mistaken. So things that look unpleasant are not necessarily unpleasant at all. And this might indicate that opposition and this idea that us and other people don't get on may be a figment of our imagination, and we just need to reframe the problem. So in the end, opposition can kind of transform into some kind of unity, though it does also transform into a different hexagram. And the hexagram it transforms into is hexagram number 16, which is contentment. And this hexagram is perhaps rather different from the previous hexagram, because the previous hexagram, we were kind of assuming the worst. This hexagram, we're kind of assuming the best, or we're assuming that things aren't going to be too bad, contentment. And we might find that there is a temporary resolution to some of our social issues. Maybe someone is nice to us. We may be, for example, it's us who has done something wrong. We perhaps haven't behaved as we should have done. And we get evidence that things aren't as bad. We thought we'd fallen out with someone because of our own fault, and they start being nice to us. And so the danger then is that we say, oh, okay, everything's fine, everything's back to normal. We know it's not back to normal, because when we do this kind of thing, we always think that it's not our fault. So if you're coming into this this reading, you're not coming here as the guilty party, are you? I mean, not really. You because you have your own justification, but you do have to consider how it might have been your fault, at least partially. And so, if you get some evidence, oh, things are okay, you've been forgiven, then you might just go on as per normal. Then that's not the right approach, because this hexagram it moves to is about being complacent. Although it may work the other way. It may be that we're talking about someone else. Someone else has been out of order. Maybe you patch things up. Maybe you're thinking now you're dealing with a reformed person. But no, people don't change. And contentment, I think, is about not really taking it seriously. There has been a problem socially. That problem has been temporarily patched up. You've found enough common ground to keep things going, but it's not going to last forever. And deep down, it's not going to last forever, because with this hexagram, you can perceive trouble on the horizon. Now, what do? You take the view that you've got a breathing space, a short breathing space. And if you're the guilty party, if you've done something wrong, then you can make up for it, and you can make sure that things don't happen again like they have done in the past. Or maybe it's just you accepting that some people are as they are, and in the end there's always going to be a difference, and some people are maybe incompatible, and just recognizing that rather than just assuming that everything is just going to work out, because in the end you have to listen to your feelings, go right deep down, and what is your intuition about the issue. And I think if you listen to that feeling, okay, I shouldn't have said intuition. I don't want to mix up feelings and intuitions. They are quite different. But what are your feelings about the matter? And if you are being complacent, then you don't be complacent, and instead, be realistic. And I think that's the best way of handling it. But as I do like to often remind you, this is just a hexagram for one day, and tomorrow is going to be perhaps a very different day. And now I want to turn to the astrology, and I did want to talk about the astrological Halloween. I also wanted to just do a review of what's been happening astrologically with the outer planets, very, very briefly, maybe with particular reference to the elections, because we just had election results on Tuesday, and certainly in the I'm talking about the United States here, of course, but in the United States, I think the general perception is that the Democrats did very well, and the Republicans not so well. You could say that this reflects the fact that Trump has been president for a year. You've had sort of issues about food payments. You've had issues about tariffs and perhaps the economy. So it's perhaps not surprising that Republicans didn't do so well in the November the 4th elections. And in particular, people are talking about the election of Zohran Mamdani. And I don't want to go into great detail about Zohran Mamdani, but I did want to just quickly look at the chart for this announcement. The announcement that he won. I mean, I don't know. It probably became clear around 9 in the evening. I mean, although it was obvious he was going to win, all along. I think the betting markets were saying he was going to win. So there was no point in trying to use astrology to predict the result. So as far as Zohran Mamdani is concerned, here's a chart for November the 4th. That's when the elections were, Tuesday in the evening, when it must have become clear not just that Zohran Mamdani had won the mayoral election in New York, but also that the Democrats had done well. And in astrology, Saturn represents the Democrats and Jupiter represents the Republicans. And that might not sound right. It might sound counterintuitive because you think if you're a progressive, you might regard the Republicans as being very conservative and saturnine, but it's more than that. Saturn is a planet of people who work. It's also quite restrictive, and of course it's about maybe government control. If you are a Democrat, you're more likely to believe that the government has a role to play. That is Saturn. Whereas Jupiter ruling the Republicans, I mean, again, that makes sense. I mean, Jupiter certainly is quite moralistic, is quite conservative in its own way. It has beliefs about right and wrong, moral right and wrong, and perhaps you could also say that kind of which kind of sort of contradicts that to an extent, but you could say that Jupiter is about the free markets. You do what you like. You can do what you like. If you want to pollute, you pollute. You're whatever. You shouldn't have the government interfering in people's lives or in the lives and operation of companies. And Barbara Waters, in her book, I think it was Hoary Astrology and the Judgment of Events, talks about Saturn being ruler of the Democrats and Jupiter ruler of the Republicans. And so you might then argue that when Saturn is strong, you would have expected the Democrats to do well. Now, if you look at what was happening on the evening of November the 4th, Saturn was strong. The reason it was strong is because of that mutual reception with Venus by exaltation. So Saturn, not so long ago, was in Aries. And Saturn in Aries is not a good place for Saturn. Saturn is it's fallen in Aries. But now that Saturn's gone into Pisces, it is in mutual reception with Venus, because Saturn's in Pisces, a sign where Venus is exalted. Venus is in Libra, a sign where Saturn is exalted. And I think you could argue that Venus-Saturn mutual reception by exaltation was helping the Democrats. And it happened just before Venus moved into Scorpio. Now that Venus has moved into Scorpio, that mutual reception by exaltation has broken. It doesn't exist anymore. But we have the election results. Likewise, later in the year, so next year, February the 14th, Saturn moves into Aries. So it is possible, in spite of this victory, well, certainly for Mamdani's victory, that the Democrats shouldn't necessarily be too optimistic about how things are going to unfold. This doesn't say how the midterms are going to go in 2026. And I mean, I'm going to look at this in greater detail, but this is just my first inclination. Just a few thoughts here. So if you were a Democrat, you shouldn't necessarily be too complacent. If you take the Jupiter-Saturn theory, that Saturn moving into Aries may not necessarily be good for the Democrats, and of course Jupiter remains in Cancer. So you could argue, well, Jupiter in Cancer is slow though at the moment. Jupiter's about to go retrograde, and so maybe that's not so good. And of course Jupiter was moving towards a trine with Saturn, so maybe there are reasons why Jupiter just wasn't performing as well as one might have expected it to. And so aside from that, thinking about what's happening politically at the moment, we do have some changes going on. It had been noted that a lot of the outer planets had been in positive signs. So you had Pluto in Aquarius, you had Neptune in Aries, you had Saturn in Aries, you had Uranus in Gemini. And okay, Pluto's going to stay in Aquarius, but Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune are all about to go into negative signs. I mean, Saturn and Neptune are already back in Pisces. Uranus is about to go back into Taurus. And so this could be we could have a feeling that things are going back temporarily to, a previous state of being. And you could also argue with Zoran Mondani's election that this is a very Pisces thing. Saturn in Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, a lot of people having high hopes about Mamdani. I think that it's very unlikely that these hopes are going to be realized. And I mean, I will look at this sort of astrologically, fairly soon. But that hope, and perhaps people thinking that the past can be rediscovered. When you think about Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, particularly Neptune in Pisces, you think of this sort of obsession with wokeness and diversity and so on. And these planets are back, and so maybe there's going to be a view amongst progressives that some of the events of the last year can be rolled back, and we might get this over the next few months. But I do think it's temporary. Neptune will go back into Aries. Saturn will go back into Aries, and Uranus has just left. Is about to leave Gemini, and I think I'll be talking about Uranus in my next video. So it just may be a temporary return to the past, but it's only temporary. And I think that by next year, early next year, we'll be back into positive territory. I mean, I don't mean positive as necessarily being good, but by the end of April, we will again have the outer planets all being in positive signs. So now I just want to look at the astrological Halloween. So Halloween obviously is October the 31st. I mean, that's what we think. But Halloween is a cross-quarter day. And roughly speaking, with a cross-quarter day, I mean, you have a cross-quarter days. I mean, you've got Imbolc, February the 2nd, Beltane, May the 1st, Lammas, August the 1st, and Samhain, or Halloween, on October the 31st. With the cross-quarter days, these are important festivals, which are often seen as being being the beginning of a season. Certainly from a Northern Hemisphere perspective, you might say that Samhain, Halloween, is the beginning of winter. But maybe these days were originally intended to kind of represent the halfway point between the equinox and the solstice. So, we had the equinox around September the 21st, 22nd. We've got the solstice coming up in December the 22nd, 23rd. And the halfway point is the astrological Halloween. So at the solstice, the autumnal equinox, northern hemisphere, the sun is at 0 degrees Libra. At the solstice, the sun is at 0 degrees Capricorn. And where is the halfway point? The halfway point is at 15 degrees Scorpio. So the astrological Halloween, because it's astrology, can be timed. We can say exactly when it happens. So here is a chart of the astrological Halloween. Usually I set these charts for Westminster, but this one is set for New York. And so you can see that the sun is exactly at 15 degrees Scorpio. So this is the moment of the astrological Halloween. And as far as when it happens, I think I make it as being 11 o'clock, 11 o'clock last night if you're watching this on Friday. So it happens on New York time, very late on Thursday evening, 11:03 45 seconds. I mean, I don't think I've got that quite exact to the seconds, but maybe to the nearest 15 seconds, it's 11:03:45. And so that is the moment. So if you are in California, the astrological Halloween will happen on Thursday the 6th at 8:03:45. Now, if you are in Europe, then that will happen, or Australia or New Zealand, then it will happen on Friday, November the 7th. So it does kind of depend on your time zone. Now, I would regard the astrological Halloween, that moment that the sun is at 15 degrees Scorpio, as being a moment of power. Because 15 degrees Scorpio is semi-square the solstice point. It's semi-square the Aries point. And it just could be a moment where the gates are open. I like to use that phrase, the gates are open, when we're talking about things like new moons, full moons, equinoxes, solstices, and indeed this halfway point between the equinox and the solstice. So the gates are open, and the power of the cosmos sort of comes flooding in. And so one perhaps needs to look at what's going on astrologically just to get some idea perhaps about the next 6 weeks between now and the run up to Christmas. And if you look at this chart, it is potentially quite strong, but maybe not in an immediately obvious way. And there's 15 degrees Scorpio. You can see that it's exactly 15 degrees off Venus. So Venus is making this micro aspect between the Sun and Venus. Furthermore, there is another 15 degree Ceres aspect between Uranus and the Sun. So that links, and then of course you've got this astrological Halloween is happening at the same time as when it is when it's making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune. So you could say that at the very least that Sun, Venus, and Uranus are closely bound together at the time of the astrological Halloween, and so that 15 degree aspect, if you think about it, it's a semi sextile. So if you want to have a chart that shows all of the 12 series of aspects, the conjunction, the opposition, the square, the semi-sextile, and the quincunx, and it shows all those aspects as conjunctions, you would look at a 12 harmonic chart. If you want to pick up the 15 degree series as well, you would use a 24th harmonic chart. So, and that would show it all as a conjunction. But if we use the 12th harmonic, that means we will see an opposition between the Sun and Venus, and we should see an opposition between the Sun and Uranus. So let me just show you what I mean. If I set up the 12th harmonic, remember how harmonics work. If you want to calculate a harmonic, you just take the positions of the planets, convert to absolute longitude with the 12th harmonic, multiply by 12, and then you successively reduce subtract by subtract 360 until you get a number below 360, and then convert to the signs. I probably should have a video about that one day. So as far as the harmonic chart is concerned, as here, so let's look at the 12th harmonic, so I can show you what I mean. So the 12th harmonic, there you can see the sun. There's the sun, it's opposition Uranus, it's opposition Venus. So we've got a Venus-Uranus conjunction on the 12th harmonic, and that is because Venus and Uranus are quincunx. And in fact, Neptune is involved as well, because there's your sextile. Uranus and Neptune are in sextile, so that means it's shown as a conjunction on the 12th harmonic. The Venus-Uranus quincunx is shown again because of a conjunction, and there's a sun on the other side. But it's particularly important that we have that Sun-Uranus opposition on the 12th harmonic, which is the same as a 15-degree aspect. And so I think that there are grounds to think that the next 6 weeks is not necessarily going to be that stable, because of the influence of Uranus, and things are going to be stirred up, and I think that Venus is involved as well. Now, this chart is set for New York. Now, I'm not going to do a grand sort of geographical tour, doing astrocartography, but I've set this for New York. I mean, I didn't set it for New York for any particular reason, but given I have set it for New York, it's quite a strong chart. The sun is exactly on the IC in New York, and you have, if you then do this, you can see the sun is on the IC. Uranus is 15 degrees from the midheaven. Venus is 15 degrees from the IC. And so it's a powerful chart, and it has happened just after Mamdani has been elected as mayor. Now, is this something to do with Mamdani? Mamdani doesn't become, I don't know, when does he get inaugurated? Well, he's not going to get inaugurated before Christmas, isn't that right? I assume he'll get inaugurated the beginning of next year. But it just may say something about what's going on in New York. It could be about an event in New York. It could be about the stock market. It could be about Wall Street. I mean, if you set this chart for Washington, D.C., it's not quite so powerful. It's New York, but it is especially strong this Halloween. So it could be the next 6 weeks. The astrological Halloween, could really make itself felt. But the Halloween feel, New York aside, this affects everyone, this astrological Halloween. Sun is conjunct true black moon Lilith. And so that in itself is a real Halloween thing. I mean, but Lilith is the kind of thing you would associate with Halloween. And so perhaps things are going to get released now. And that's what happens with the astrological Halloween. The gates are open. Because the thing about the Celtic Halloween, there's no precise moment. And that's astrologically what I find slightly irritating about the Celtic festivals. Because I'm into astrology, I like to think about a precise moment. Where is it? I mean, I know people say with the Halloween that the spirits are abroad and so forth. But where is the moment? But with the astrological Halloween, we've got a precise moment. Absolutely precise, and you can drill it down to the second, and at that moment things are released. The fact that the sun is conjunct true black moon Lilith, the sun is making these 15-degree aspects to 15-degree series aspects to Venus and Uranus. Something is manifesting, and it could represent it is on the world point. It's 45 degrees, 135 degrees from the Aries point. So those dark mythical beings which reside in the collective unconscious could start to manifest as we hit this astrological Halloween. Anyway, that's all I want to say on the subject. I think it's just an interesting idea. I don't think it takes away from Halloween. Halloween is always going to be on October the 31st. It's an important Celtic festival, but just using astrology, one can start to see it in a slightly different way. So, thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.